Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. It is counterclipping show number 132 for July 17th, 2023. I'm glad that you are all here. Welcome, everybody. I don't really have any news for tonight, but we are clipping on to Richmond 2, and I am closing in on having it finished, actually. There's a whole storage solution involved too, which I'll probably do a video on once it's done. I haven't. It's not quite settled yet, so we will see what it looks like at the end. I'm a little confused by some of the counter designations in the 1864 order of battle. Tonight, our topic is I didn't want to. I wanted to get away from doing the sort of best of type of thing because that implies something that I don't necessarily mean by it. So we're going to do a designer spotlight instead. And tonight it's Joe Balkoski, legendary designer. Joe Balkoski of SPI and Victory Games and Avalon Hill fame. And this gives us a good opportunity to take at least talk about a little bit some of the less known titles. I'm sure we can think of some of the big ones off the top of our heads. So before we get started, I'm going to remind everybody to go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Most viewers are, in fact, not subscribed. So that's it's weird, but it's not weird because it's not particularly unusual for people with YouTube channels to have that be the case. But if you are not subscribed, please subscribe. And super chats and super stickers are on. It's a great way to get your comment highlighted on what is sure to be a full evening of folks here in the chat. And it also helps support the channel. And if you'd like to do more to support the channel, there's links to do all that in the video description, including the Patreon, which I may be doing like a Patreon milestone type of thing pretty soon, but we'll see. I kind of haven't made my mind up about that. And speaking of milestones, it seems likely at the current pace that we will be hitting 7,000 subscribers pretty soon. So I was going to do another giveaway, but then after thinking about, hey, I got 7,000 subscribers coming up, I might as well wait for that because I've got kind of a Lulu of a giveaway, if you know what I'm saying. So it's going to be probably a few weeks on that, but once we hit it, we will do a big giveaway. It's just one item, but it's something else, right? So I can't wait to do that actually, and that is courtesy of someone whose name I will announce at that time. So thanks for that. You know who you are. But I guess I don't like to talk about the Charles S. Roberts Awards on this show because I feel like I do plenty of talking about it not on this show. But I will mention that the Charles S. Roberts Awards for 2022 have been announced, and that's all on charlesrobertsawards.com. And there was a show on No Enemies Here on Sunday night. We did make one of our two deadlines. I wanted to have a bit of a revamp of the webpage done by then, and that did not happen because there's some writing involved, and couldn't do it all myself. And I didn't finish my part, and some other people are I don't want to blame anybody else, right? It's my fault. So we will have a bit of a website upgraded. It's not like a wholesale overhaul or anything. We're going to have a pretty nice enhancement to the CSR webpage pretty soon. Alan Salazar, thanks very much. There is a lot of Joe Balkoski games. I have 21 games to talk about tonight, and I have combined a few into a single slides. So we'll get to that. So before we get any further, Christopher Smith asks, is there fog in Akron? I look misty. There's no fog. That is Canada, which is on fire again. The air quality is not awesome at this exact moment. So before we get started, let's say hello to Six Actual, Alan Salazar, Bill Simone, Brian Foley, Christopher Smith, Dan's New Toilet, Daniel Silverthorne, David Zell, Dip Gamer, Failure to Route, Henry Sikorsky, Peter Fulford, thank you very much for the subscription, much appreciated. The legend himself, Fucko, is here. Jeff Beeler, somebody just dropped off and I didn't catch him. Joe Okabayashi, John Longshore is in the house. John Stanley, John Clark, Jonathan Dyer, Frank Davis, Marty Sample, Meandering Mike, Nerd Workshop. Thanks for stopping by. Perry Sparopoulos, Stacking Limit, Todd Cox, Vince Reed, William Aarons, William Bird, Jeff Anderson. Not sure I got you. I left Pennant Race off the list. Actually, I did leave Pennant Race off the list. So I will admit to that. I wouldn't have had anything to say about Pennant Race anyway. So it's on the list. You can go look at it on BGG if you want. Um, so it's all good here. We are all good tonight. So what's going on? So other than that, and other than the upcoming trip to WBC, we resumed our game of last Blitzkrieg last week, and I believe we finished December 26th, which I believe means we have 3 turns left, something like that, which we could finish in as quickly as 3 weeks, but we'll see what happens. Vicky, thanks for stopping by. Much appreciated. We are incidentally drinking in an attempt to kill, but it ain't happening tonight. Ardbeg Wee Beastie, five very young years old, but it is bottled at 47 point something percent. So they're not skimping on that, which is good. So I had the chance over the weekend to. So I had 3 birthday parties on Saturday. There was my sister's birthday and my brother's birthday and my wife's sister's birthday were all last celebrated on Saturday. So it was a busy Saturday. So I got jack all accomplished on Sunday. But on Saturday, I did have the chance to sample some fine Lagavulin, which I liked very much as usual. But it's a little pricey to buy here on its own. So anyway, thanks, William Aarons, for the kind words on the CSR show. We are very happy with it, with the show and how it went and how the whole process went. We see many opportunities for improvement for next year. So I might do like a special show on that, which reminds me to put up the banner. Also, don't forget to join the Ardwulf's Lair Discord server, with the link of which is in the banner. And I don't know if I put an email address in there or not, but if anybody wants to get a hold of me, it's ardwolfslair@gmail.com. So one of Vincery is currently clipping pens or battles and sipping local straight rye whiskey. Very good. Middle West, I haven't. Okay, so Middle West Spirits, local to Columbus, Ohio, has done some really good stuff and some friggin' trash. Um, they used to have, believe it or not, a really good vanilla and honey vodka that was really good, and boy, it ain't as good anymore. They have an unaged rye whiskey that I think comes in. It's something like 67%. That will take the top of your head clean off. But boy, it tastes strongly of rye, which I like. John C. from the sunny Philippines, remoting in from the campus of Purdue University. So sunny Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. So that's cool. I do not feel at all bad for the folks in California, which isn't even on fire to the extent that Canada is at the moment, as far as I'm aware. I mean, it's probably on fire, but right now the smoke from Canada is drifting our way. We've had some air quality warnings over the last couple of days, so I'm kind of trying to limit the yard work, but I got a lot of yard work to do, so I haven't really stopped. So on the plus side, um, unaged rye. Pretty much, yeah. That's not an inaccurate statement from Peter Fulford. Unaged rye. I mean, mostly it's aged though. I mean, most commercial ryes that you buy do have some age on them. But depending on where they're made, 2 years is generally considered to be sufficient in the U.S. where the temperatures are normally pretty hot. If you go to like Scotland or Canada or someplace like that, you're going to need more time because it's colder and the stuff doesn't age as fast. It doesn't inherit characteristics from the barrel as quickly. So I don't know that I have any other business tonight to talk about before we get directly into it in what appears to be record time. We might have a GMT update next week. We'll see if that actually happens. I will do a show on the Monday coming back from WBC. If I haven't mentioned it yet, we're going to WBC. I'm going to be there on the 29th for 3 to 5 hours, is my guess. We will see what's going on there. I'll be the first time there. I think at the door, it's like $30 to get in, something like that. If for just like one day, which is not cheap, but it's fine. So anyway, let's talk about Mr. Balkoski. Now, the way that BGG tends to list credits is often very confusing. So we had a big list that included a number of titles on which Joe was a developer or co-designer, and it's hard to tell without actually looking at the games. But I went and looked at the games. So Vakdam Rhine, the credit is actually Jay Nelson, with a developer credit to Joe Balkoski. So this isn't a Balkoski design, but it's kind of a cool game to kind of start with. So I figured I would start with it. So John Stanley, much appreciated. When do we talk about the 29th Infantry Division? I will get to that because that's gonna wait till I hit Atlantic Wall. Let me put it that way, which is a Joe Balkoski design. So where am I? Where am I picking? Oh shit, there's more. There's more orange guys. Okay. There's a lot of orange guys. Anyway, the support is much appreciated, John Stanley. Thank you. All right. So this is kind of a classic. A lot of people have fond memories of it. It's a monster game. It's a four-map monster, Battle of the Bulge, the battalion level. Consensus nowadays is that it's got some issues, particularly campaign game issues, more so than the scenario issues. This did serve as sort of a rough inspiration. I won't say basis for the Gauss system, um, but it's kind of where Joe Youst started developing Gauss from in this and a couple other somewhat related systems, including the original Atlantic Wall, um, which aren't the same system, but they've got similarities, right? Um, this is one I haven't played. I played the Gauss version, but that's not. It is an error to consider that the same game at all, right? It really is a completely different game and a completely different experience. This, however, is not a super light game, right? There's 30 or 40 pages of rules in this. It's a fairly heavy game for its time, 1977. One of these days, I'd like to get Joe Balkoski on the show, but we'll see if we can make that happen. That would be cool. It is, the sort of the classic Redmond Simonson graphic design genius cover that really takes a very simple picture of a tank and really gives it a ton of punch with virtually no tools whatsoever. Right? Very limited color selection back then, all that stuff. Vince Ree asked about the most underrated Balkoski design. I've got a choice for that actually, but we're not going to hit it. It's toward the end of the list. Let me put it that way. And I've played, owned, or at least looked at rather a lot of these, but that's you know why, right? Because like a huge pile of them are GCACW and um that's why I've played as many Joe Balkoski games as I have for the most part, but I played a couple of the other ones as well. All right, so I think we got that set up. All the orange guys. Um, all right, so moving on from Vakdam Rhine. This obviously is an SPI game. I believe it was released in a flat pack, but it was also released in the big 4-inch soap box, that box, the big 4-inch SPI box. It is on my wish list, but it's like very little on the wish list is like a priority at this time that I'm willing to pay anything less than a bargain basement price for. I'd kind of like to have it. I'd kind of like to fool with it. I do think the Bulge is actually a pretty good battle to war game, but the victory conditions can be a little tricky because kind of got built in victory conditions, as does Market Garden for that matter. And it's kind of a classic situation as much. So Confederate First Corps in the this is in answer to John Longshore's question. Confederate First Corps, you probably can't see that, has orange unit symbols in the 1865 Order of Battle. And there's like a ton of them because it's all over the place. It's like the Peninsula, well, it wouldn't be Peninsula Campaign, but it's going to be 1864 and 1865. So there's like three different compositions of this corps at this point. Oh, Kevin Featherly has not played any Joe Balkoski games yet. This is Hood Strikes North is definitely going to be easier to approach of these two. I will tell you that. Korean game, Korean War from Victory Games, which is obviously on the list. is kind of complicated, right? The new version from Compass is very nice. I like it. Some people complain that it's got 4 maps instead of two, so now they can't fit it on their table where they could fit the other game on their table. Hood Strike the North is very digestible GCACW, and GCACW is an amazing system anyway that I highly recommend. All right, so moving on from Vakdam Ryan, we have 1977's DMZ. This is one of the 4 games in the Modern Battles 2 quad, and obviously it is one that therefore I have not looked at. So this is hypothetical combat in the late 1970s in Korea. I don't really know anything about this game. This particular picture would be of the folio version. Um, a lot, but I think not all of the quad games were released individually as folios, and these certainly were. A lot of people did like the Modern Battles 1 and 2 quads, but it's just topically, it's just not something I'm into. So I don't really have um, a particular interest in that. Now they're not all hypotheticals, though, right? There's some Arab Israeli war stuff in there, and I think there's a couple other non-hypotheticals in there, but a number of them are hypotheticals, in which I'm also not really super into, but it's not like I don't have any hypothetical games either, right? So I don't have a lot to say about this one. This one I do have some things to say about. This is Atlantic Wall. Okay. Big monster. Not sure if I remember whether this was released in a flat pack or not. It may have been, and it may not have been. I'm not sure I remember. But I have it in the soapbox, as you can literally see behind my fat head. So this is a pretty interesting game. This covers D-Day from the invasion through the 1st of July. And so you're not getting like the Cobra breakout and stuff like that. It is, as I recall, 5 maps, so it's quite large. There's a lot of counters. It is battalion scale. And this is another one of those inspirations for Goss that inspired Joe Youst, right, to create that system, and eventually a different version of a different game called Atlantic Wall. Let me put it that way. Now, this has some characteristics that we see in a lot of other Normandy games, right? Namely, that there is a special set of mechanics that you use on the beach landings. Okay, that's super duper common. Um, Even in a game like The Greatest Day, where one of the things in the designer's notes that Starkweather was trying to do was to like use as few special rules for the landing as possible, but there's still a decent amount of special rules for the landing, right? Um, very interesting game. There's a good scenario selection in it. Unlike the updated Atlantic Wall, there's probably not many more scenarios, but it is a better scenario selection. For example, there is an Omaha Beach scenario and a Utah Beach scenario, so you are not stuck playing what amounts to the entire game or a major portion of it, as you are with the decision Atlantic Wall. Okay. Um, it's also not a particularly simple system, but nor does it look exceptionally complicated. Now I've got it. I've set the Omaha, partially set the Omaha Beach scenario up, and I have yet to actually play a turn of it. So that will happen sooner or later. Um, this is it's probably going to play fairly quickly, and it's definitely going to play a lot faster than Goss did. That's for sure. Goss and it's not that slow playing for the kind of game that it is, I suppose, but it's not fast playing, shall we say? And you can take a considerable amount of time to run movements as well in Goss. Um, Perfidious Albion mentions Task Force, which we will in fact get to, but which I don't have a whole lot to say about because it's not one that I've looked at. Um, this is very interesting, and the Fleet series is also obviously on this list, and we'll take a look at that as well. Um, all right, so moving on is Operation Typhoon. Now, this is a co-design with Joe Angelillo, and this is I have had a lot of people. Well, maybe a lot is an exaggeration, but multiple people say that this is either one of their favorite games, or they think it is one of the best things that SPI did, or that it's one of the greatest games of all time. And Milt Janowski, who did Jaws of Victory, definitely feels that way, and that's why he used it as the basis of Jaws of Victory. So this is, as I recall, there's a number of different permutations of the sort of unknown strength chit system, and this uses one of them. This one, I want to say, I got it not too long ago, and I really haven't looked at it particularly closely since then. So Bob Kowalczyk asked, "Is there a D-Day game that starts almost right after the landing, i.e., just after clearing the beaches?" I don't. That's a little specific. Many Normandy games, however, do include a scenario that starts after the landings, so that you don't have to deal with the landings. And that's another problem with um, that's another problem with Atlantic Wall is there is no post landing. The decision Atlantic Wall, although I think the core, I've played it and I think the core system is good. It's got a lot going for it, but it's got a number of significant problems, including the really terrible landing minigame. Brian Jarvis is talking about Killing Ground, but Killing Ground doesn't start just after the landings. It starts with the Cobra Breakout. But Overlord, the expansion that includes the northern map and the landings, may include a post-landing scenario as well. It's another one that I haven't really looked at very closely yet, to the extent that I'm not even 100% sure that my copy is complete, although I suspect that it is. Brian Jarvis picked up a copy of Operation Typhoon and I'm punching it, going to play it later this summer. That is fantastic. Um, it's like on my list of things to do, and right now, um, the list of things to do is to finish up Mr. President. Obviously, we're playing on Wednesdays to finish up last Blitzkrieg. Right now, the to do list, which this is the stuff that will result in videos, is to finish up Mr. President. Remember, I'm only doing one turn. I'm not doing the whole game. And then I'll have like a thoughts video. And then I need to do a look at Triumph and Glory from DVD Lock and Load. Terry Terry Doherty's game on Relica and with the other Battle of the Peninsular War. That just arrived. It is one of the prototypes. Thank you, Lock and Load, for sending it to me. So I got to get some video done of that as well. And I've been wanting to take a look at that for quite a while. So that is actually going to be pretty cool. Operation Typhoon, though, is I would call this kind of a seminal game. I mean, a number of the ideas here did appear elsewhere, right? I mean, you've got similar mechanics in Invasion America and in Panzer Group Guderian, but this is I feel like really Panzer Group Guderian, but that's a little bit different, right? Because that's just kind of unknown unit strengths. Where you just flip the counter over and you've got a unit strength, right? Where this is a little bit different, and then Victory in the West is a little bit different from that. So I'd have to check this. I'm not a huge fan of mandatory attacks, but I'm willing to put up with them for certain games. So we will see. Jeffrey Wesovich mentions Glory and Empire, Relica, and Vimero. That is, in fact, the game I am talking about. So don't get too excited. It's not coming out yet, but it should be out pretty soon. And hopefully I'll have some video. And now that I've played La Bataille and the designer comes from a La Bataille background, I think, have a little more context to have thoughts about it, right? Christopher Smith has bit the bullet and ordered Mr. President. I did hit I'll talk about this a little bit, but I'll save a lot of it for the video. I did hit some things that I felt were not crystal clear in the rule books. Because there's a million books. But so much of the game is so clear as to exactly how to do it that it's a little bit jarring when you come across something that it doesn't seem to be explained quite as well. But I am play wise. I finished activation phase 2, and that video is literally sitting in the background being edited, which I hope to finish tonight. But that video will be out this week, so that'll be episode 5. Jeff says Glory and Empire in October. It feels like it's taken a while, but you know, if it takes a while, it takes a while. That's fine. It's not like I don't have plenty to do. So Greg Grant says, I think we're talking here about Killing Ground and Overlord. Mandatory attacks is exempt if in bocage or other constricted terrain. That's the case in Battle for Normandy as well. There are mandatory attacks, but you're only required to do mandatory attacks if you are yourself attacking. And what's next? And only if you're in certain types of terrain, but open terrain is one of those things. So Perfidious Albion says Operation Typhoon was fun but frustrating as the Germans, but that was the reality. Tried 2 or 3 times, came close, but the mud and ice was a killer. Yeah, that's exactly how the Germans felt about it, to be completely honest. I mean, historically, the Soviets won, so in the game, they ought to have a pretty good shot, right? This is true. Ed Meister mentions that Battle for Normandy does have a June 7th scenario. Now, Battle for Normandy has um, a separate system for the invasions as well, but I found it really very easy to deal with and didn't feel intrusive, and it's relatively quick. So that's good. All right. So moving on from Up Typhoon, we have a game I haven't seen. This is Balkoski's first naval design that I found, Up Scope, and this feels like a weird cover for SPI, to be honest about it, because of, I guess, the color. I guess it's got like I don't actually know if this is a photograph cover, but it kind of looks like it is. What the hell am I even? Who am I doing? SEV, whoever that is. Okay, we got a Johnson, a Hoke, and where's Beauregard's in here somewhere too, as I recall. But I don't see him at the moment. There we go. All right, I guess we're doing them next. Perry Sparopoulos has Jaws of Victory and will be setting it up next month. I really want to give that a shot, to be completely honest. But it doesn't look like that's going to be stenciled in anytime particularly soon. John Longshore has kickstarted Compass's Burning Banners. I guess I found out after the fact that that's like the first like real Kickstarter that they've done, where it's not just like okay, so we're about to ship this. You could like get a last minute pre-order type of thing. The game is a Chris Moeller design. It actually does look really, really nice if you are in the market for what feels an awful lot like a straight fantasy war game, which is not a thing we see very often anymore. Mike M says, does MMP send out a shipping email after the charging email? They did for me for On to Richmond 2. So I'll tell you that. I that may be a new phenomenon though. I didn't get a last minute order in for it. I probably they're still going to be shipping it for another couple of days would be my guess. That is my guess. Clark Commando 1983. Mark, thanks for stopping by. Mark has played AH Submarine multiple times, but has not played Upscope. This is a game I don't know a lot about, and I don't feel like it has gotten a ton of attention. So for those for whom Joe Balkoski is a favorite designer and are looking for maybe another Joe Balkoski game that they have not already seen, this one might be one to take a look at, presuming that you are interested in submarines. I glanced at the rules for this. It's about a 20-page rule book, so it's not absurdly with typical SPI formatting. So there's that, but it does not look absurdly complicated or anything like that. So this may well be worth a look if you are into submarines. Beyond that, I can't really tell you a ton about it. Jason W. also backed Burning Banners. It does well. It certainly looks amazing in terms of art. There's no doubt about that. I got to tell you, Jeff Beeler, I'm not a big fan of this rule. And that is one of the things that cools me off on Victory in the West specifically, as sort of part of the family but Kharkov Battles, I believe, has mandatory attacks, or Fallblau and Kharkov Battles have mandatory attacks too. So I have been known to be willing to put up with it if I like other features of the system, as I did with Battle for Normandy. So I might be willing to I've got plenty of that family of games at this point, so I better like it. All right, so this is Ney versus Wellington. This is Quatre Bras from 1979, based on the Wellington's victory system designed by Frank Davis. But this appears to be a solo credit to Joe Balkoski. But I believe it does say, I could be wrong, but I think it says in the credits original system designed by Frank Davis. But I could be mistaken about that. I didn't check that. Um, so this is another one that I have picked up in the last year or so. That sounds approximately correct. I picked up a couple SPI magazine games because I wanted the games. This one I wanted to kind of take a smaller scale look at that Wellington's victory system. Stacking Limit. And this is on the table right now. It's also decent looking game for 1979, if you think about it. Mike M says he got the charging email for Under Richmond 2 on Friday, late to pre-order. So you don't always get the shipping email same day from Multiman, but I don't think I've ever had it take them more than about 3 days to ship the thing after they've charged me. And you got looks like hit on a weekend. So in my case, for On to Richmond specifically, they did ship it the same day that they charged me. I have to look at the maps to make sure that the maps are the trimmed maps, actually, because otherwise I got to complain, and I don't want to complain. Because some people are telling me that they've just received theirs, but they got 2 sets of maps, and one trimmed and one untrimmed, and the other one was in a separate packet, but I didn't get a separate packet. So this is okay. Greg Grant saw on Facebook today that from a VUCA simulations designer that Red Strike is getting close to shipping. Pre-order price is probably going away soon. So anybody wants to get in on that, get in on that. Perfidious Albion, it's funny you should mention this. So he says Pet Project used some of these games to follow what happened historically. If they're able to replicate the actions, and that reinforces the fidelity of the design. I agree with that in broad strokes. Also, I have also had this exact same idea for several years, and I've just never gotten around to it. In my case, however, the specific idea is to use Kevin Zucker's 1809 to replicate that 1809 Danube campaign, because I have a 3-volume set of books and a couple other ones, actually. I've got a decent amount of material, like actual research material on that campaign. So I would be able to go, plus games about the battles if I really need to. Brant from the Armchair Dragoons is here. So yeah, what I'm hearing is actual separate parcel, not just wrapped up and stuck in the box. I definitely only got 1 set of maps. I suspect it's fine, but I should really check it just to be sure before it goes out of print and nobody can get them anymore. I also, William Bird mentions USPS informed delivery, and I find this very useful for a number of reasons. One is that I can keep track of my stuff incoming. Another is that I can keep track of my wife's stuff incoming. Now, it doesn't track everything, right? If it's not shipped USPS, it doesn't track it, but it's still super duper handy. Super duper handy. I haven't looked closely enough at Avalon Hill Submarine recently, and I've really only ever glanced at it. I suspect that Upscope is a little bit more complicated, but that is an absolute guess. And Kevin Featherly asks, this is also a really good question. Some of the newer secondary market, MMP, Balkoski, GCACW games are out of its price range. How well do the older and cheaper versions stand up? So there is I'd have to look to see where this is available. So I talked about this in the On to Richmond 2 video. They started up until Grant Takes Command and or Skirmisher #1. Every game had its own game specific rule book. There was no series rule book. Okay. So you will have a little bit of problems if you try to play the older games with the new series rules unless you have the updated counters to do that. I seem to recall that they had them on the GCACW resource site on the multi-man site. And I don't remember exactly what they were called, but there's like a half sheet of counters that replace some leaders and units that update them to the series rules. However, if you just play those games out of the box, it's not like they're vastly different, right? The games were all very similar in broad detail before the series rules. So they still hold up really well. The maps still look gorgeous. There's a reason I bought all the old ones, right? So I still haven't played any of the old ones. I've only played the new ones, actually. Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Mo, thanks for stopping by. All right, moving on from Nay versus Wellington, which I think I have said all I have to say about. We have City Fight. This is a co-design with Stephen Donaldson, aka Donnie the Punk. Now, I don't know because SPI was a little bit flexible when it came to who got credits. It's hard to tell like whose design it really is, but I've heard the stories about Donnie the Punk. Who is no longer with us, by the way, if you want to look that up. For those curious, this is not the same Stephen Donaldson that is the fantasy author Stephen Donaldson. That Stephen Donaldson is still around, as far as I'm aware. This Stephen Donaldson, let's say, had a interesting life, and not in an awesome way. But he passed some years ago. City Fight is modern urban combat, and as I recall, it is a man-to-man scale. It is known for being very detailed, but sometimes our idea of what very detailed amounts to drifts over the years, and I don't know if that's one of the cases here. Joe Press says it was mostly Donnie's design. So Joe was there. Joe should know. That's kind of the sense I have, but they are credited as co-designers on this. This is kind of an interesting game. It's got some RPG elements in it. It is something I have never seriously looked at, since modern man-to-man combat is absolutely not in my wheelhouse. Phil, I think we might have played Here Come the Rebel. I don't think it was Here Come the Rebels. It might have been it was definitely Battle Above the Clouds. I forget now. Maybe it was the old version, because it would have been the old version at the time, right? The On to Richmond Roads to Gettysburg 2 was not out yet then. Jeff Beeler sold this one too. Tom MC says man-to-man very detailed. Always think of Gunslinger. Yeah, without sort of the cultural cachet, I suspect. Yes, this is correct, and you can actually see this in the scans of counter sheets on BGG. In fact, Chris Promise, who is the main person, or one of the two main people at Green Ronin Games, RPG publisher, is also a big war gamer, and he had mentioned Donnie the Punk's musical taste and how they impacted City Fight all those years ago. A couple of years ago on Twitter, and Chris seemed to think that nobody at SPI got it, and I think he was probably right, but I'd be a little surprised if Dunnigan didn't get it right. I'd be a little surprised, to be honest. This would be a great series, but it would also be a shit ton of work, and I have not managed to wrangle the time to do a project like that yet. Jeff asks, and everybody who's played it should feel free to chip in here with their play experiences for City Fight. It's one of those games that I think isn't normally considered to hold up fairly well, but that may end up being unfair, right? Considering the sort of shift in what our idea of very difficult is that has occurred over the last 20 or 30 years. And that has definitely happened. Games that we considered monstrously complicated years ago now only look like averagely complicated. I think I've mixed these up, but I'll figure it out later. It's pretty cool cover art. I mean, definitely, you see the Redmond Simonson touch on this, right? All right, next up from 1980, the Kaiser's Battle. This is the Kaiserschlacht, the big German offensive in 1918. This is another one that there's been a few games on now. Ted Racer's got one, for example. Storm in the West 1918. I think that's what it's called. That was re-released. It was an old Command magazine game that was re-released by GMT a couple of years ago. Brant says there's some chrome from City Fight. You can bolt into Firefight and get a pretty solid game out of it. Now, I'm also a little unclear as to what the exact relationship between the two games is. Now, there's the other two. Perfidious Albion says that it was awesome, but you have to have a like-minded player to carefully track things as well. You otherwise make errors and not make contact. That's unfortunate. That would be a bust. And also mentions that it actually works best as a moderated game, which I totally agree. William Aarons asks about Kevin Zucker's 1809. So this is the Victory Games 1809. Zucker's got multiple games on this topic. And it is inside one of the OSG series, but it is Campaigns of Napoleon rather than the Library of Napoleonic Battles. Brand says there's no official relationship between Firefight and City Fight. Man, Mo says that in another 20, 30 years, 100 to 150 page rulebooks will be the norm as complicated, and today's 50-page rulebooks will be considered basic. I don't. It's sometimes difficult for those of us inside the hobby to see this. Okay. And I don't feel like I have any particular problem seeing it, but I've seen a lot of people inside the hobby say this exact thing. Like, war games are super complicated nowadays, and we need way more simpler war games. Well, there are plenty of simpler war games, right? You don't have to go and play Goss, right? But that may be less obvious, maybe because to those of us who are like kind of on the inside, that because we tend to play the more complicated games, right? That's the game, definitely the games that appeal to me on them. I mean, I tend to lean toward more complicated games. Let me put it that way. There's still plenty of easier games that I like, right? And I think Mo's taking the piss on this, but there has been a trend, and I think it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, what were considered really complicated games back in the 70s are just, you look at them now and they're like, this is really not that complicated. I mean, the rule book might suck. And that's certainly a thing that happened back then, but it continues to happen nowadays. We've got some really good rule books now and some really terrible rule books. I'm not sure that was not the case back then, to be completely honest. I don't know what that was all about. So, all right. All right. Mo says there's simple war games in various levels of complexity, but by simple, do I mean 68 pages or simple like love letter? I think 68 pages is, I mean, I don't understand why anybody would have a problem comprehending a 6 to 8 page rule book, right? And that this includes SCS, right? Which has a 7-page rule book, right? I mean, usually there's at least 4 or 5 pages of game specific rules, but not always. Sometimes it's more than that too, but you can definitely find really easy games. The folio games from Decision, right? Huge selection of really easy games that include some very well-known battles. They're kind of cheapies as far as format goes, but there's just a huge number of really easy games right there, and those probably average 4 pages would be my guess. So then as now, there has never been a particular lack of simple games, but it may be that our communication is not what it should be, and that we, and I'd be as guilty of this as anybody, are leaning toward focusing on the bigger, more complicated game because this is what we do, right? Frank says that rulebooks today are much more heavily illustrated most of the time. The games are not significantly more complicated unless you count each picture as 1,000 words. I don't think on average the games are more complicated now, actually. Maybe a little bit, but not by very much. If you look at like all the war games that people are doing right now, a lot of them are really simple. And there are games that somebody like me is just gonna not look very closely at because it's like, okay, well, this is not my thing. And that's fine. But then you got to consider that how the presentation to somebody that's not already inside the hobby, right? Mark, I want to say it's a little more than that, but it does not have a huge page count. That's true, and the page count is not necessarily directly correlated to the complexity, and I think we all know that, of course. Um, Carl says that when we get simpler games now, we have complaints of historical accuracy. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's true. Um, you know, you gotta bear in mind your audience, right? So who the hell is this? Okay. This is the some kind of Richmond core. You got to bear in mind your audience, right? Is your audience that you're targeting your game for, is it hardcore people, or is it people who are potential war gamers, right? Um, okay, hold on a second here. All right, so Peter Rushton says he believes non-war gamers find the decision space offered by hex and counter games is what makes them seem complex to learn. I do think this is a factor, actually. A lot of I'm going to balk at using this terminology, but I'm going to use it anyway. A lot of what sort of mainstream gamers play, and I don't want to use the term Euros because they're not all Euros, but this is often true whether they're Euros or not. Have a like really constrained set of mechanics where okay, it's step two, I can do A, B, or C, and that's it. Whereas in the in a hex and counter war game, for example, it's much more of a blank canvas. So the decision space can be much larger and it can also be much smaller than it feels like it is too. So I think this is true, but also I think that we inside the hobby might tend to overstate this a little bit. Um Ugh. This is, of course, correct. Sometimes, for the sake of brevity, some rules are not adequately explained. That's called bad rules writing. Okay, for the sake of brevity is not a good excuse to write unclear rules. If if not brevity is called for, then don't be brief. Be clear. I would be much more pleased by a clear, longer rule book than I would by a really short but shitty rule book. A great example is the relatively recent NATO: The Cold War Goes Hot from Compass. It's a complex game, but it's not crazy complex. I on the 1 to 9 scale, I'd say it's a 7 for me. I think maybe even no, I'd say it's a 7. So it's not crazy complicated, but it's got like an 85-page rule book. If you just look at the page count, you'd be like, "Oh, this is way too much." But it's wordy. It's clear. Bruce Maxwell, the designer, took the time and the words that he needed to explain how the rules worked correctly. So and often multiple times in the book. So um, that is an example of a complicated game, but not off the charts complicated. But if you like just count the pages, it'll seem like it's crazy complicated. Okay. Do I think the Hex Encounter wargame community is a shrinking customer base, generally speaking, because the influx of youth is little to none? Okay, so this is another one of those things that I think is true, and we ought to kind of be concerned about it, but it's also overstated. So in at Origins, we had multiple slots run of Salerno 43. Okay, so this is the recent Simonich Salerno 43. It's pretty simple. It's the simplest and definitely smallest of those Simonich Zachbon games. And there were at least 3 or 4 players in those various games that were sub 16. Okay. So, I mean, should we work to bring more young people into the hobby? Yeah. But I don't think that the influx of new blood is as negligible as a lot of people assume. Um, because to some extent it's our fault, right? And by our fault, I guess I don't like the term influencer, but I'll use it here because I don't mean just people with YouTube channels, but people who write articles and stuff like that. Um, because we tend to be we in the hobby, we tend to be older, we tend to be visible, we tend to have a game room where we can leave a thing set up for a long time, and that's great for us. But it can lead people to false expectations, right? That, oh, you need to get this room that's like isolated in a vault somewhere to get this wargaming done, but that doesn't have to be the case, right? Like we've said, there's plenty of games that you play in a single sitting, and then you put it back in a box and you go home. And that single sitting might be an hour and a half, or it might be 12 hours, right? So I think we're the outliers, but it's not necessarily obvious if it's me and people like me that you're watching, right? Because we've got big game tables. All right. Dip Gamer has had great success introducing some teens to wargaming with Europe Engulfed and across the Narva. There you go. And Europe Engulfed is not super complicated, and I haven't looked at across the Narva. Is that the series from Revolution Games? In which case, I haven't looked at across the Narva, but I have a couple of the others in the series. I think it's the same basic system as Poland Defiant, as I recall. Anyway, moving on from the Kaiser's battle here. We have Fighting Sail. This is S&T 85. This is I say mostly Napoleonic because um there are some American Revolutionary War and naval engagements in here as well. This is a game that I think maybe didn't catch on to the extent that it deserved back in the day. If someone is looking for a more straightforward, easy, cleaner to play game like Wooden Ships and Iron Men, this is something that really deserves a look. If there is a fault in here, it is that it's a magazine game, and therefore there are not as many scenarios as you would like to have. I do know that Jim Ozarski has played this on his channel on Tabletop Simulator a number of times, and they love it. So, um, uh, Okay, this is the game I'm thinking of then. So Jeff Taylor says that young people just aren't interested in history enough to be interested in war games. This comes later in life. That's the stereotype. I'm not sure to what extent that's true. I mean, I was reading books about World War II when I was 11, right? So, I mean, I've always been interested in history. Um, I mean, admittedly, as a kid, I was weird. So, I mean, there's that, but um, I think Fighting Sail does use a square grid, as I recall. I believe that's correct. Um, so, and this is, as Mo points out here, this is a valid piece of actual evidence that um, we collectively, the wargamers, have been complaining about this for decades, and yet here we are, right? There is there are enough of us to have dozens, if not hundreds, of active channels dealing with war games on YouTube alone, not to mention a number of podcasts and blogs and a variety of other things. Even if you go outside sort of the dedicated hub sites like BGG or Console World or whatever. Um, So now the new generation might see it differently. That's a fair point, and I can't speak to the new generation, right? Because I'm not in the new generation, to say the least. Next up is the first game. It's not the first game, but it's the first game we're getting to. Well, I don't know if it is the first game or not, actually. Sicily was the last one. So actually thinking about it, Operation Grenade is actually the first game in the Victory in the West system proper. Okay. And the first two are Balkoski designs, Operation Grenade, and as we'll see, Patton's Third Army's, I think, coming up next. So this is another one of these interesting randomized strength chit systems. Now, this one in particular, you do have a pool of random chits, and many, but not all units, will have a randomized strength code. So it'll be an A, B, C on it or whatever. And you'll draw a chit, and it'll have an A with a number, a B with a smaller number, and C with a smaller number. And then that is the strength of the unit. And then to reflect a step loss, you flip that marker over, and once you've drawn it and associated with that particular unit, it stays with that unit. Okay. That is how Victory in the West proper does that. Okay. Joe Press says that Patton's Third Army was first, but Joe, I looked at this and this is 84. Oh, yeah, they're out of order. Sorry, you're right. Patton's Third Army was first. I wrote that down. I didn't. I that's probably got to be my fault. I had to go in back and fix that because I pulled all these off of BGG, and BGG only does it within the year, and they are the same. I believe the same year. So we got Operation Grenade, which is 1945, fighting in the Rhineland. This is one that I've had for a very long time, but haven't played. Patton's Third Arm. I've got all three of the original Victory in the West games. The third one is Sicily Race for Messina. This is Patton's Third Army, which is a little bit earlier, about 5 issues before, with the Howard Chaykin cover that I strongly dislike, but some people don't mind. I dislike it very strongly, and that really is more a matter of it is not fitting with my expectations of what war game covers are supposed to look like, which is largely informed by what Avalon Hill and SPI were doing in the 70s and 80s. And it looks more like the cover of a Sergeant Rock comic book, which is again makes sense considering that that's where they got Howard Chaykin from. So this is true. This is true. Peter Fulford says that collectors of vintage console games, a lot of those folks are quite young. I mean, so there's like a nostalgia element that says, yeah, I wish I had a like original Nintendo or whatever the hell it was back in the day. I could try Tecmo Bowl again or something that I played the hell out of back in the day. But I've had that experience already with video games, and I'm like, man, this sucks. I just can't deal with this primitive interface anymore. So maybe a youngster that doesn't have the nostalgia might find it easier to deal with that. I think this is one of my least favorite war game covers ever, but it's clearly not the worst. That would be Operation Husky. So very, very interesting system. Again, it's a cousin, if you will, of the system in Operation Typhoon, but they're not quite the same either. Next up, we have Task Force Modern Naval Operations. To me, although the rulebook isn't that big, this looks pretty detailed. And it is tactical and operational. But I called it operations because that's what I could fit on the card. So looking at this, this is not something I've given any look to. Somebody else had mentioned up thread that this is a game that some of the ideas made their way into the fleet system, which obviously makes sense. It's the same designer, right? Um, so Mo says, back in our youth, war games were the step up from Monopoly, Clue, etc., which were the mainstream games. You also didn't talk too loudly that you played them, otherwise you'd be considered a nerd. So yeah, and now there's a lot of other avenues for that. And I don't even know that Monopoly and Clue are necessarily the games anymore that people start playing games with. We're back in, in the olden days, in the mid Pleistocene, as it were. It was right. You started with Monopoly, Clue, Stratego, Risk, whatever. And then if you were interested in this kind of thing, you would be interested in something that SPI or Avalon Hill was doing. And in some cases, you could buy those games in a place where you could buy a Parker Brothers or Milton Bradley game too. Um, Vlad C says he's played Patton's Third Army some years ago. Didn't enjoy it much because you're basically doing a frontal assault without much maneuver. That's interesting characterization of that campaign. Now I haven't played it, and if that's an accurate, because there's a fair amount of maneuver. There is some frontal assault in that campaign, but there's also a fair bit of maneuver as well. So I'd be now I'm more curious to take a look at it again. It's on the to do list, but there's a lot on the to do list, as you can imagine. So gaming is definitely much more not just games, but nerd games are much more accepted now than they were back in the 70s and 80s. I can personally attest to that. I don't have a lot to say about Task Force other than the observations that I and others have already made here. It is got a very orange cover, which certainly probably grabbed your attention off the shelf since it looks like a traffic cone. But it's not a bad cover. It's just that's really really orange. Is all I'm saying. Grognard Rich says he started playing war games to learn about military history and the mechanics of war, not so much trying to step up from simpler games. I mean, I do feel like for me, I don't know that I can draw the line quite that directly, but I mean, I definitely feel like I got interested in war games because I was interested in history in the first place. And less so that it felt like a more advanced version of Monopoly, right? All right, Air Cav. This is S&T 84. This is not S&T 84. This is from West End Games. And this is helicopter warfare in the 80s. And ergo, I was not interested in this at all back in the day. It is kind of an interesting cover. I got to give it that. But I don't know a whole lot about this. Yeah, that's the game I'm talking about is Operation Husky. Woof. That's a high school art project. That particular cover. This one, Patton's Third Army was at least drawn by a professional artist who's like legitimately talented and was just like working outside of his genre. So I don't have a whole lot to say about Air Cav. It was part of West End Games. I think unfortunately brief journey into being a war game publisher. They did some interesting things. They did some things that were good, some things that were interesting, and some things that were duds. This is one that if you're interested in this as a topic, it's probably interesting. What I think was like I think the best war game. There's somebody in the chat is going to argue with me, and please do. I think the best war game that West End did was Imperium Romanum 2. That's my personal opinion. And part of that is based on it's not like anything else, right? It's a completely unique experience playing that thing, which is not for everybody. Before we move on from that. Next, I'm glad Mo's here because he could give us an update on the status of the reprints of the Fleet series from Compass Games that is in the works. So there are some add-ons that appeared in various magazines and other sources as well to this. And if you look at the BGG list, you'll see some of that stuff. There's 5 games that were released in this series from 1985 to 1990. Third Fleet, I believe, was 1990. I didn't get the date right on that too. Brant says there's better AirCav games than AirCav. This is modern naval operations. Okay, and not my topic, but and it's hypothetical modern at that, but or was at the time. Now it's just alt history modern. Um, Despite that, these look good. And not only do they look really interesting from a thematic and mechanical standpoint, they're some of the best looking games that Victory Games did, I think, too. They have larger counters, so the typical problem with Victory Games counters where the gutters are like 2/3 the size of the counter. Um, was not a factor here, and in fact wasn't a factor with any game that they did that had bigger counters. Um, but these are attractive games. They're of their time, don't get me wrong, but they're attractive games for the moment. Peter Fulford's his Second Fleet favorite cover. I'm not crazy, but I don't think that's the best cover here. I think Sixth Fleet is nice, and I think Third Fleet is nice, and I kind of like Seventh Fleet too. I think Second Fleet is my second least favorite cover on this list. Um, so you got to tell us, Mo. You got to tell us. Mo's literally in charge of this. I mean, I think this kind of the standard is Harpoon nowadays, but I've got no stomach to play Harpoon. I'd much rather investigate these. And in fact, I will probably buy whatever Compass decides that they're eventually going to redo here. Mo may not actually be at liberty to say where he's at exactly, but now I cannot speak, as Joe Perez hints at here, as to the fidelity of the simulation present here, because this is not my field. I and it's hypothetical anyway, right? So we're working off of at the time publicly available information. So um, to some extent, that's based on guesswork, and some guesses are better than others, right? Mo can publicly say that they're in the works. Mo, get them done, get her done, so we can have those tasty games. I, for one, am looking forward to seeing them. And uh, so I haven't looked at Blue Water Navy. What I have looked at are what the hell's it called? South China Sea from Compass, and it's I think standalone companion game, Indian Ocean Region, which I have to say is not an amazingly evocative title. But the game actually looks those actually look pretty cool. To me, those look more promising as successors than Blue Water Navy, but I have looked less at Blue Water Navy, so that may be an inaccurate conclusion that I have drawn based on incomplete information. I screwed this up. I'll figure it out later. It's all good. Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go. And you got to quit the day job too. You don't need that day job. Food. Anyway, um, Jeff Beeler says it's a lack of amphibious operations, and I think I mean, I've looked at Sixth Fleet, and I really haven't looked at any of the other ones, but and that may be true, but it's sometimes fair to say this isn't about that too. On the other hand, any game that deals with, say, an invasion of Taiwan, which I think one of these do, kind of needs something for amphibious invasions. I think. There you go. Frank has to go by his own system. That's Joel Balkoski's take on his own system. So I hear it's great. That's all I know. Retirement's going to be nice, but don't forget, if you're not retired now, you're probably not going to get to retire because that's going away. All right. So, barring the fact that we will eventually see in the fullness of time, see something like a new version of some or all of the fleet games from Compass, which I'll again be delighted to take a look at when they're closer. I don't have a lot additional to say. Here's another one from West End Games. So this appears to be basically 1944 West Front, and will end right around the end of the year. Um, it's a decent looking game. The cover's pretty nice, I think. I've always kind of liked this particular, like it's kind of like a style of novel cover art that was very popular back in the 70s and maybe the 80s that I really liked. That you don't see very much of. Axis and Allies cover is another example of that, by the way. Um, but it's got a good cover. The map looks okay. The counters look okay. Stacking Limits says it's a good game, and it's a Joe Balkoski game, so he's probably right, right? So, Perfidious Albion says the problem with the fleet system was it was next to impossible to kill a carrier task force. Again, guesswork. Maybe it's really hard to kill a carrier task force, based on publicly available information. You don't have access to the and the designers didn't have access to the classified stuff either. So, Larry's, as far as I know, Larry Bond is still involved in Harpoon, and now exactly what that looks like from a what's being worked on standpoint, I haven't the vaguest idea. So don't ask me, but um, that's weird. I'm getting a weird effect on the other screen here, but it ain't coming up on StreamYard, so I guess I'm not worried about it. So, and Brant, who's going to be more clued into this than me, it says they are working on some stuff. Presumably Larry is included in they. So, and Chris Carlson is driving a bunch of it with Larry in more of an advisory role. With hey, that sounds great. Um, I mean, so that's a pretty recent phenomenon, right? Last 4 or 5 years, maybe that Compass has really started cranking out the reprints. But it's not like they're the only ones doing that. GMT's doing plenty of reprints, right? I mean, if you do, we just count without counting stuff like SPQR that they're reprinting again, or Great Battles of Alexander that they're reprinting again. You got new versions of Pacific War, Peloponnesian War. We've got another mystery project on the way, which I think Marty Sample told us what that was. So that's a fairly new phenomenon, and it's probably going to continue to trend until it doesn't anymore. When all the good stuff from olden days has been reprinted. Alan Salazar, it's a good question. I'll open the floor to this. What reprint do folks want most? Now, the things I really wanted, the thing that I really, really wanted was Pacific War, and we got that. And errata aside, I don't really think I think the importance of the errata is being dramatically overstated by certain hyperbolic people. Um, the I That's it, kind of. I mean, I'd love to see a couple of other things, but it's not like I gotta go. Like Eric Lee Smith's Civil War comes out, which is supposedly coming, I think, at some point. That'd be great to have it reprinted, but if it got reprinted, well, I've got the old one, so I mean, I could play it anytime, and it's a terrific game. Um, Jason W. Yes, 3 reprints, just won CSR awards. That's something we got to think about. We got to think about that. Agri Day says Decision Games' whole model is reprints. I wish that were the case. I really wish that that's what the model was. It is not. So there's going to be a selection bias here, right? So you'll often hear a person of a certain age say, you know, back in my day, we had good music. It wasn't this crap you kids listen to nowadays. And I'm convinced that Sturgeon's Law applied back in the day just as it does today. And that 90% of that was crap back then too, but that nobody remembers the crap. They remember the good stuff. Now, there's definitely a lot more games as a whole, and war games specifically being released now per year than we saw in, say, 1978, when there were 3 major companies in the field and a handful of minor companies that might do a game or 2 a year. So, but they're gonna run out of good stuff to reprint at some point, and at some point, when you start reprinting whatever crap you can get your hands on or get the rights to, then we will definitely see that not happen anymore. Um, yeah. So there. So all right. So Decisions new edition, second edition of War in Europe is a true second edition of War in Europe. Okay, and I've looked at it. I've only played the original. It does some things that I agree with, such as giving the Western Allies their own production spiral instead of giving the Soviets and the Germans their production spiral and sticking everybody else with a reinforcement schedule. That just didn't seem to make sense at the time. It doesn't really address any of the fundamental issues that War in Europe had. So I'd call it although it's certainly a graphical upgrade, I'd call it a missed design opportunity or a missed revision opportunity there. I think they could have done something really cool with that. There has been continuous talk of Decision doing another new version of War in Europe, but in a series of magazine-sized games. which I have absolutely no confidence in at all. So I got to say that. Is Stigler here? Because we're talking about decision games. And I would assume that every other comment would be by Stigler if he were here. No, 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 no. So this is another good point, right? Decision is pretty good via the vehicle of the magazines at doing games on topics that we have not already seen a million times, and I think they should get some credit for that. Now, do some of those not land? Yeah, but they have Nordic Maelstrom. Welcome back to the chat. Um, this is true, and this is sort of a side effect of the much greater volume, right? War games used to be, if you were really serious game person, regardless of what kind of game that was, back in the 70s and 80s, wargaming took up a lot of the mass of that space. And now board gaming in general is huge, but wargaming is a relatively small part of it. Also, don't forget that people come back to wargaming too, right? I mean, I left, I came back to wargaming. So, um, oh yeah, Stigler is at that GBACW thing in Gettysburg. He's having a great time right now while we're slaving away here in this chat. I do think that the Napoleonic Wars, if we're talking about the GMT Mark McLaughlin game, that totally deserves a deluxe, beautiful deluxe reprint from GMT. And I don't know why it hasn't gotten one yet, but I believe it is supposed to get one at some point. Mo, it was a niche before too, but the non-niche part of the hobby was smaller, right? So it feels more niche than it did at the time. Lots of companies have new stuff, and yeah, decision. Well, so they're new games and they're new battles for the most part, but it is not like it's not a ex nihilo game system, right? The designer kind of started with some assumptions from a couple different classic games, such as um the Old East Front Quad and Panzer Group Guderian and a few other things, and kind of built from there. So, but at the same time, there are also in those two games, there are some battles that we haven't seen much of before, too. So even on the East Front, there's still untapped potential there, right? I would totally watch a live feed from the Gettysburg people. I mean, not right now, but were many RPGers back in the day also wargamers? How are we defining many? If by many we mean a goodly percentage, then I'd say yes. But if by many we mean a majority, then probably not. Not by the time I was in there. Now, I mean, if you go back to like 1976, then yeah, I think that basically everybody was also doing wargaming, because a lot of people got into RPGs via wargaming because it was considered wargaming for at least 6 or 7 years after D&D came out. All right, so moving on from Against the Reich, on which I have said very little. Jeff Beeler, thanks so much for the support. Much appreciated. If somebody wanted to redo this, I would probably buy it. However, I believe we are safe from a reprint of this product because it would require a license from the Burroughs estate, the famously litigious Burroughs estate. And I don't think anybody operating at a wargaming scale is going to get such a license nowadays. So, okay, so Brant says the really RPG schism came from around 1990 when Vampire the Eternal Struggle, that's the card game slash WOD, made a huge change in the way RPGs were played, especially marketed. I think that's also tends to be overstated. I think the D&D players kept playing D&D. by and large. Maybe experimented with vampire, and I think not VTES. I think he means VTM, Vampire the Masquerade, because VTES is not a RPG. Um, but it's actually a good game, though. I actually liked that particular collectible card game. Brant knows the story about this already. All right, St. Lo. This came out originally from West End. This, I believe, is the War Drum Games slash quarter, maybe Quarter Deck had the same cover. I don't know. And I picked this picture because it's a much more attractive cover than the West End Games cover. This is available through Compass right now, not a reprint. This actual game, although I think they're working on a reprint as a new version as well. Um, but this is supposed to be a really good game. And it appears to be entirely, and it's more or less operational. It's more or less battalions, but some units are companies. Um, and it's supposed to be a very good game. And if you've got the one you can get from Compass, it's got pretty high production values as well, with a mounted map and all that jazz. So there's that. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I would even use the word distributed, because they weren't the original distributor. They were just kind of, they like bought some copies and are selling them now, as far as I can tell. Maybe that is a de facto distribution arrangement. I don't know. Nordic Maelstrom is a fan of the storyteller game engine. I think it's got its virtues. I didn't get that into the thematic parts of it, but as a mechanical exercise, it works better than you'd think. But it depends on your interest in those particular topics, right? Joe Perez says that a good number of people who also showed up for the SPI Friday night playtest sessions were also into RPGs. I mean, that makes sense given the era, right? For the duration of the 70s, a lot RPGs were being fueled by wargamers, right? Now, I certainly still know some people who do both too. So there's that. Henry Sikorsky says production copy that Compass is distributing is very good. I've heard that. I think this is true because one of the publishers, it may have been Wardrum, was in fact, I don't know if it was Chinese or Japanese or what, but um, was one of the publishers, and this particular one has a Wardrum Games logo on it. So, all right, Findle70 says, as someone who loves the Fleet series, the full experience of what the game wanted to do happens in the PC game Command Modern Operations. I don't know if the same skill games will feel the same. I was really tempted to buy Command Modern Operations when it was on sale. But it's expensive, and even on sale, it was still like $40, and I balked at that price because I'm broke still from Origins. So, and I'm going to WBC. I don't have to really buy anything at WBC, and I don't know that I will. I might pick up that Return to Europe in the recent World at War magazine, though. That's possible. Perfidious Albion, you are a person of exquisite taste, as usual. All right, moving on from St. Lo, we have the Korean War. Now, all right. So I have played this. It is not just really good, but it is really the definitive Korean War experience. I have played a couple other Korean games, including OCS Korea, and I like OCS Korea. It's fun. But it is a strictly operational simulation. Simulation is not even the right word for OCS, but it's a strictly operational affair. Okay. And to the extent that any higher level politics kind of figure into it, it is done in the form of the victory conditions and various game states that can arise. On the other hand, the Korean War is a higher scale, so units are divisions rather than pieces of divisions. And John Longshore says Distant Worlds 2 is 30% off. I actually bought Distant Worlds 2 and it ran so bad that I got a refund on it, but supposedly that's a lot better now. Brand says that Findle 70 is dead on about command modern operations, but the UI is a train wreck. So it's bad, is what I'm hearing. Maybe. Jeff Beeler asks, is it just me, or is there a real crossover between Traveler and Twilight 2000 players and Wargame players? Uh, Maybe. Definitely Twilight 2000, because if you think about it, it's kind of an RPG war game, right? I mean, that's kind of what it was pitched as back in the day. And even the new Free League version is very wargamey by Free League standards. Um, and Traveler had a lot of tie-in war games, right? There's kind of a lot. There's a big list of 7 or 8 different games that tied directly into Traveler, and a couple other ones that sort of tied into Traveler, like Asteroid and stuff like that. So, so yeah, I think there's something to this. All right, so Fiddle 70 says they've made strides with the last 2 big updates. So I'll have to take his word for that. Eventually, I will pick that up, but I just haven't yet. All right. So let me, I got more to say about Korean War. So this is really, I think that if you're really interested in this topic, this is the game to get. A lot of the geopolitical factors are included in it. You've got a lot of good simulation here, and it does not take that long to play. You can play this in a sitting. Um, it's a really good game. It's highly playable, and it's a good simulation at the same time. And sometimes those two flavors do not taste great together, if you know what I'm saying. Mark Hodgkinson asks, how I'm enjoying Europa Universalis, The Price of Power. I haven't gotten the chance to play it yet, other than the turn we played with the designer, but that's going to happen at some point. It looks incredibly promising. Um, so much so that I went and found another couple super heavy non-war game type things, although to some extent Europa Universalis is a war game. Um, but like Hegemony, which I just picked up, which you may see an unboxing of, is not at all. That's a straight Euro, to be honest. But it's a very heavy looking Euro, and I was interested enough to buy another couple. And I bought Eclipse, the new version of Eclipse as well, which is also I would describe as a straight Euro. All right. So yes, this is true. Traveler has been nominated for the Ennies. That is an RPG award based from the forum EN World or N World or whatever they call it over there. High Guard is up for best rules and best cartography, while the Stranded adventure is up for best free product. I've looked at Stranded. I think I bought the High Guard update and haven't even opened it yet, to be honest. After all, if you have the old one, you don't really need the new one. They did change some numbers, but other than that, there's not much changes. So when I call this the definitive Korean War game, that is the context in which I mean this is the definitive Korean War game. The version from Compass is the same game. Okay. I think they may have made some very minor tweaks, but it's the same game with different graphics, and it's got bigger counters and bigger maps. So, like I mentioned before, some people did complain that it's now on 4 maps instead of 2. Um, I will say that I didn't quite like the color palette that they chose, because if you when you first glance at that map, the land doesn't look quite like land. It looks like more water, and then you kind of have to stare at it for a minute to make it make sense. It just does not present anything like a playability problem. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. All right. So next up is Omaha Beachhead. This is a 1987 game, and I actually haven't talked about this. So for those who don't know, Joe Balkoski is, and I believe still is, the official historian of the U.S. 29th Infantry Division. Okay, and he has written a pile of books about the 29th and about Omaha Beach specifically. So that is one reason why I was sufficiently interested to run down the 1970 whatever it was Atlantic Wall by Joe Balkoski because he is an expert on this topic. And this is another one that highlights that. Now, this game is supposed to be pretty good. The map is unattractive in a very Victory Games esque way, meaning it's fine, it's playable, but it's not pretty as such. A couple people have said this needs a reprint. Yeah, this is just weird. It just you get used to it. It's not a big problem, but it's just it looks weird when you first start looking at it. So other than being maybe not up to 2023, Agrade Day asks, presuming we mean Korean War, yeah, you can finish it in a long sitting. You can play it on like Saturday. Victor Games Vietnam will take you forever to play. That's a completely different ball of wax. I mean, if you think about it, that's 11 years of war too, right? So Victor Games Korean War is like a year and a half or something like that, because that's when stuff was happening. So I mean that's a factor, but it's not the only factor. It's a way easier game to play. Um, could use a really good map or reimagining, but the game looks very interesting. And again, I suspect that Mr. Belkowski has something very interesting and valuable and insightful to say about Omaha Beachhead. So, and I've got a bunch of his books too, for that matter. Uh, Nordic Maelstrom. Yes, you use the charts from the original game because the weapon numbers might be different, but you can absolutely use the updated rules from Into the Woods or the website or wherever you got them. It's all good. I can answer that question. Yes, very much so. But you'll notice that I'm not sure that we have seen a Civil War game here so far, and we are up to 1987. Am I right about that? Am I missing something? It's possible I'm missing something. Um, yeah, I see a World War One, a Napoleonic, a pile of World War Two, some modern stuff. I have seen no Civil War games on this list thus far. That's very interesting that you should have noticed that, Brian Jarvis, because here we are, Lee versus Grant, 1988. Now, this is a game that's it's another one that's on my list. To check out at some point, and you can get this reasonably inexpensively. There was a copy on the flea market table at Compass Expo last year, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to buy this." And then I looked in the box, and it was all loose pieces in the box. Huge red flag. No, no. Whoever owned this did not care about it. Okay, you didn't even put it in a sandwich bag. So no thanks. I'm not taking the chance on that. Even it was cheap, but it wasn't that cheap. So so this is a commonly held to be a precursor of the great campaigns of the American Civil War system. It looks very promising. It is the Wilderness or Overland campaign, although it says the Wilderness campaign on the cover. It's the same campaign of 1864. It's a bit of a different scale than GCACW, I believe, but it's not that far off either. I'd really like to see exact. So here's the thing with this. Um, the GCACW series is and always has been very cohesive, right? There are a few game specific bits and bobs in the second game that weren't in the first game, and a few game specific bobs in the third game. Here Come the Rebels that weren't in the previous games, but it's all very cohesive. Lee versus Grant sounds like it's really similar and a definite precursor, but it's not the same game system. So I would personally rather steer clear of that language lest somebody get the wrong idea. Now that said, I've talked to at least one or two people that really like Lee versus Grant and don't really care for GCACW. So, and I'm not even saying that stacking limit is per se wrong here, but I think an affirmative answer to this gives an impression that you might not want to give. Nordic Maelstrom says ACW first love from history, and then it switched to ancient Greece and Rome and World War II. I'm a little less into World War II than I used to be. I mean, I think that's the reason for that is obvious. We all play a crap ton of World War II games, right? And I'm going to continue to play a crap ton of World War II games. But my other main interests, as far as genres go, is going to be more or less in the order of Napoleonics, American Civil War, and Ancients. More or less in order. The Napoleonics and Civil War can kind of flip back and forth from time to time. So, all right, Light Division from 3W. This is another one I have no idea about. This is what looks like a company level tactical game in a modern Persian Gulf. So that makes it hypothetical. So I don't know a whole lot about this. I don't like the cover, I can tell you that, but it's a 3W cover. I actually mistook this cover just based on its graphical style as a GDW cover for some reason. And I don't think that's fair to define folks at GDW. They did some covers back in maybe later than this that I've talked about this. Um, that I just don't like from a cover art standpoint. Brant says that it's not a bad game, but the map is painful. I didn't look at the map. I don't have a violent reaction to the cover. It's not that bad. Well, they certainly fought a fair bit in Maryland, didn't they? So, mixing in Napoleonics, musket and pike is sort of like a second tier topic of interest to me. That's sort of musket and pike, age of reason, whatever we want to call it, period, sort of before Napoleonic, but after medieval. Um, I ap- I want to have some games that cover those topics, but that's a lot of history for like several hundred years of history, and there's a lot of different conflicts taking place in that history. So you kind of got to be careful, right? I mean, I got a couple 7 Years War games, and a couple of miscellaneous other things, and a couple Italian Wars games, and that's about it. Alistair Logie says it's real cheap on Noble Knight. So Brand says it's not a bad game. Grognard Rich says it's more operational than tactical. So I based that statement on the fact that it seems to be company level, which to me says tactical, but it isn't necessarily tactical. It depends on the topic. For Vietnam, company is operational, right? So English Civil War, 30 Years War. I've got a couple things on English Civil War. I'm not sure about 30 Years War. So I'm fairly impressed with what I've seen so far of the Musket and Pike dual pack, and I'll be happy to pick up any other dual or triple or whatever packs they want to do. So I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. You pack 4 games in a box and charge me $60 for it. Oh, okay, no problem. And this is actually Mo. This is actually something I wanted to ask about. Actually, is like what topics? 'Cause I know Mo's into modern and World War II and what else, right? Um, so he says that World War One is about as far back as he goes. He likes ancient Rome and some other ancient games from time to time, but modern is preferred. I haven't a less interested in modern, to be honest, but that's me, right? Um, Jeff Feeler says that Balkoski got flack for using the 29th and light division rather than one of the regular light divisions. That's probable, but that's also Wargamers whining. So we're good at that. Eric Hansen is very much into games set in North America, 1812, Revolution, French and Indian Wars. I'm actually becoming a little more interested in American conflicts before the American Civil War. One of the things there's the to-do list is overstuffed, right? One of the things I want to look at is War for America. I think there's a good game there from what I can see. I know people have had voiced issues with it, but I haven't given it a close enough look to evaluate those. I've also had people say there's nothing wrong with it at all. So I don't know. Um, I've got it's is it in here? Actually, yeah, my American Revolution set is in here. All three games. There's actually five. There's four games on the shelf behind me. The fifth one is Liberty or Death, and that goes with the coin games out on the other shelf. So, yeah, come to Origins. We can get you going there. French and Indian Wars is heating up a little bit with the release of. I'm done clipping, by the way. With the release of Bayonet and Bayonet and Tomahawk. Bayonets and Tomahawks. I don't know why I had problems with that. All right. So moving on from Light Division, we don't have much to say about. We have the great campaigns of the American Civil War. Now, I don't have all the games in the series here for two reasons. One, this is kind of the ones that Joe had the direct involvement in, but aren't reprints. And I couldn't fit any more on the slide. So, which is the real reason they're not all on here. So the series originates in Stonewall Jackson's Way in 1992 and is running until literally this month. So, and we've got more GC ACW things in the pipeline. See the latest skirmisher for that. This is a terrific series. I love it. It is my favorite Civil War series. I like GBACW as well and Line of Battle, but this is my favorite Civil War series. And I was going to say it's not close, but I mean, I have a really high opinion of GBACW and Line of Battle. So and Blind Swords for that matter. Hell, I'm buying all this stuff. So why not? Joseph Syverson looking for more ancients, worried that it won't model the elaborate cultural and psychic space that should make games like that epic. I think an interesting thing to keep an eye on is Hubris from Morgan that's coming. It's on P500 with GMT. That's one to keep an eye on. That is not out yet, but it should be coming. I want to say she's probably done with it. I could be mistaken about that. But that looks very promising, and that's going to be a point-to-point game. I think card-driven, but it's nevertheless very promising. What scale is Nordic Maelstrom says, what is the typical combat unit? It's typically divisions, but there's also a fair number of brigades. But the size of the unit makes less of a difference because the manpower is allocated separately from the size of the unit, right? So in GCACW, you will have a unit. Okay. And I literally got a bunch of these in front of me. So here is Anderson's infantry division. Okay. Confederate infantry division. So the numbers on here don't represent you probably can't see that worth of shit, but yeah, that's not working. All right. So there's numbers on here, but those represent like the Anderson's personal tactical value and the artillery that are the divisions carrying with them. Okay. The actual combat strength is determined by the manpower and the state of that manpower. Okay. So when I move Anderson here around on the map, there are off map displays, aftermarket off map displays you can get for this. I'm going to have a manpower unit under this. And the number on the manpower is going to be determined fundamentally by the size of the unit, right? But they're kind of separate things in GCACW. So as the unit takes losses, the manpower will go down. If the unit becomes disorganized, the manpower stays the same, but the combat value, which is if it's not disorganized, is the same as the manpower, will go down by about a third. Okay. This is true. This is absolutely true. I would love to see more of that. Um, there are like I don't want to say logistical, but there are practical challenges to doing that, which is that it's way harder to find sources for that kind of stuff. Now, that bad? Well, that's bad, but I mean, I'd like to have great sources on everything, right? But so that's challenging. There's some challenges associated with that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it. We should be doing it. William Aaron's, the game you might be interested in looking at is End of Empire, which was, I think, a Command Magazine game back in the day and was redone by Compass a couple of years ago. It is unfortunately out of print. It is actually on my wish list. But again, it's nothing on that wish list is super duper high priority at this point. My collection is also very heavy on World War II, but my spreadsheet is months out of date. I really have to just go through it and just figure it all out again. So, Red Parachutes. This is an Avalanche Press game that actually looks fairly interesting. Bohemian Rhapsody is really. I assume we're talking about Hungarian Rhapsody, actually. Hungarian Rhapsody is really good, and Panzer's Last Stand I haven't played yet, but it's probably also really good. I mean, we do have a lot of games on World War II and on the East Front in general, right? So we're not hurting for games on that. Agrade Day asks, has there been a war game on the Muslim conquest? So if we're talking about like the explosive expansion of Islam, yes, actually there's a couple. Off the top of my head, we have the last jihad or the first jihad. Sorry, this would be a different jihad. The first jihad from White Dog Games. I want to say it's a Ben Madison game, and I might be wrong. I don't have to guess. It's right here. The first jihad. This is by doesn't say Wes Ernie and Ben Madison, and this is a really cool looking game. Let me get this out of the way. Since I believe, I think I have made clear my praise for GCACW at this point. Okay. There's also a game that I think is just called Jihad that appeared a couple of years ago in Paper Wars that I want to say might be a redo of a game from Simulations Canada, but I'm not sure about that. And that is a Strike Hex Encounter game too, and I friggin' should have brought it. I should have bought it, I should say. And that's just called. Okay, that is called Jihad: The Rise of Islam, and it's by Steve Newberg, and that means it is a Sim Canada game that Compass brought back. So when I said it, Command Magazine, that was bullshit. It was Simulations Canada. So this looks really very interesting, and like I said, I should have bought it when I was at Compass Expo, but if it's still there, I'll buy it this year. It's fine. But it looks pretty interesting, and it is an interesting topic. The first Jihad is, I think, a States of Siege variant, but it's another one of those you're kind of growing out from the center instead of the periphery is collapsing in on you type of thing. No sound. I think I just shut up for a second. That's unusual. You're probably not used to it. The Charles Torres, 6 to 9 Pacific World War II games. So I probably don't have that many. I might have 6, but I don't have 9. I have War in the Pacific, the SPI one, because the decision one is a fucking joke. I've got Pacific Tide from Compass and Greg Smith. Which looks like a nice light game. I've got Empire of the Sun from Mark Herman and GMT, Pacific War from Mark Herman and GMT. I'm not going to count Pacific War from Mark Herman and Victory Games. I've got, if we count it, I'm not sure we should, because the War Pacific. I guess we should, right? The War Pacific from Compass and I'm blanking on the designer's name, even though I know him. That's unfortunate. So I probably got 5 or 6, and then I've got PTO, the TSR Spitzer PTO, actually. So and Flat Top, that's good point too. I mean, when you say World War II Pacific games, my mind goes to the higher level games. I do absolutely have Flat Top, which is a magnificent game, which I can't recommend highly enough. Apocalypse in the damn it, that's not working. Apocalypse in the East is an East First Caliphate game and Against the Odds magazine. That might be worth a look as well. Looking at the chat. Yeah, so there is an S&T game on the Siege of Constantinople. And maybe there's a later one too, but the one I'm thinking of course, is the one that was done by SPI, called, ironically enough, the Siege of Constantinople, as I recall. So, well, so there's that. Those are intriguing looking games. But I assume by Yahtzee in the Pacific, we mean the Great Pacific War by Avalanche. I'm reluctant to issue any judgment on it because I haven't played it nor looked at it in any detail at all, but it appears terrible. Um, and Empire of the Sun is very highly regarded. It's kind of a, it's kind of a Mark Herman special in a lot of ways, in that you do kind of have to focus on it and kind of dedicate. You got to put the time in to make it work. Let me put it that way. It's not casual. Oof, okay, so I do also have Silent Victory from GMT. That's a straight GMT as far as I know. I'm not sure there was a constant press version of that. I'm not sure there wasn't, but and I do have the CSS games, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. So we can start counting all these things. You're reminding me that I've got more games than I can play here, right? Oh, but okay. So Nordic Maelstrom is asking for battalion, company, or platoon level. This is actually a tough ask. But the aforementioned games that Matt Davidson has mentioned, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam from Compass, are in fact in that exact scale, and those play quite well. Um, the system plays quite well. Let me put it that way. I haven't played those particular games, and I have them all. There's also a Saipan and Tinian, I think, from Legion War Games, which may still be available, but I don't have a firm opinion on that. And there's some games from Decision, but you're rolling your own dice on that. I don't know that I'm gonna recommend that sight unseen, right? Um, and there is as John Clark mentions, there is ASL in the Pacific with Rising Sun. Now, boy, you're biting off a lot for ASL, right? But you can always get the starter kits and just go get starter kit number 4, which is not standalone, unlike the other starter kits, I believe. I think you need at least one of the other ones, but you can absolutely play that, and it's pretty playable, right? And maybe that satisfies you. Maybe you don't need to step up to it the full ASL, as the full ASL people call it. GDW's Pearl Harbor. This is a really interesting looking game that I'd like to have a look at, by the way. Now the CSS Saipan is out of print, and I think Guam's out of print too, and they're fairly expensive on the secondary market. Neil Badkey mentions Grognard Simulation, Saipan, and Tinian, and Tarawa. I am leery of their system, to be completely honest. I hear things about it, and some of the things I hear sound very promising, and other things sound absolutely bone-chillingly terrifying. And that is platoon level, and that's kind of the terrifying thing about it. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, you're doing the whole thing in platoon. That's holy shit. How is this? So, so there's that. Yeah, Shima. Good call on this. I had forgotten about this. And there's Kawaguchi's Gamble. That's probably companies. Am I right about that? I could be wrong. That's also area movement too. So as John Stanley points out. Perfidious Albion. So yeah, there's like more than one round of Muslim conquest, right? So there's that. But when I hear that, I'm going to probably ask for clarification because I know that much, but I'm probably going to assume that it's that seventh, eighth century period again, explosive growth of Islam as a religious and imperial force, as it were. Um, Ooh, Mike Granelli games are sale for $20 in Revolution's July sale. There you go. Good call. Oh, and I should mention on Drive Through RPG, I haven't checked it since like this morning. As of this morning, the Classic Traveler Facsimile Edition PDF was free. So if you haven't gotten that, go get that. I've got it in PDF and in the print on demand version. Yes, this is exactly what they have. This is kind of what they kind of started with was platoon level Kursk. All of it. It's crazy. It's literally crazy. Conflict of Heroes Guadalcanal is the Conflict of Heroes game that I played, and I was not crazy about it. That's not to write it off completely, and I felt like it had some graphical problems too, where I can't see where the hexes are, we got a problem. Um, but there are people that really like Conflict of Heroes, so I'm not going to badmouth it too much. But I wasn't awful. It wasn't working for me as well as a couple of other games did. So there's that. All right. I feel like my personal position on decision games is a fair one, right? I am happy to I don't have an axe to grind on this topic. I will agree with Stigler on certain things and not on other things. So they have a not everything they do is awesome, right? Do the research, figure it out, right? You got to be self-sufficient in this hobby. Figure it out. Talk to people who've played their games, who like their games, who don't like their games. Stigler has a big bone to pick with Desert Fox Deluxe. I've got it. It doesn't really look disastrously terrible to me. And it was fairly well regarded. Now I'm aware that there are some issues, and I'm aware that the boxed version introduced some new additional magical issues inexplicably, but which is, I mean, that's comedy hour material right there. I'm not butthurt about that. That's funny. Um, but yes, I'm aware, Brant. I am aware. I get it. But like it, so yes and no. So Avalanche Press released a game called John Prados' Third Reich, which, as far as I can tell, was not Mr. Prados was not heavily involved, as far as I could tell. It is no, it's a system that's got some similarities, particularly in like the economic foundations and stuff like that, but it's not the same game. Okay. And the Great Pacific War is the Pacific version of that. It turns the whole thing into a dice pool system. And I don't actually have a problem with a dice pool system in principle. Okay. I think there are examples of games where it works fine. It isn't a favored mechanic of mine, but certainly there are places where it's fine, right? In Triumph and Tragedy, it's fine. That's a dice pool system, as I recall. It's fine. I have no problem with it whatsoever. Ooh, good call. War in the Wind. This might even still be available, actually. The Battle for Atu in the Aleutians. This is actually a pretty interesting subject. And I didn't know what level it was at, but it's an interesting looking little game. Actually, it's fairly. I don't know if it's an early Compass Games, but I think it's a game that came out right around the time I started paying attention to Compass Games. Let me put it that way. Yes, we will be sure to mention this, Tim Zales. Thank you for your contribution. Paul San asked about any games on the Rhodesian Civil War. The White Tribe from Ben Madison, and I believe that's White Dog Games as well. That is where, and there's Brant with that same recommendation. So yeah, that's I have not played. So I was concerned about it as a topic, and after I did some investigation of it, and it does look like a good treatment of that topic. So I would. That's the only one I know of. Brant is actually much more into this modern malarkey than I am. Um, so he's the person I would probably ask about that. If I've got a modern wargaming question, I'm going to Mo or Brant. And if I got a Napoleonic wargaming question, I'm going to Jim Ozarski. And if I got a Civil War wargaming question, I'm probably going to Hexy. That's kind of my precedence of folks that are subject matter experts. Carrier Wars actually, I had that pass through my hands briefly, and I kind of regret getting rid of it. It did actually look interesting. It is quite high level, and I believe it is also a States of Siege or variant thereof. There may be one or two other games on that topic, but boy, there ain't much. I can tell you that. And again, that's fairly contemporary, right? And where do you find friggin' book? I wouldn't even know where to start looking for research material on that topic. I mean, it's out there, but I'd have to figure that out, right? Um, so there's that. Okay, folks, we are just about out of time. So I would like to remind everybody to thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel if for some reason you're not already subscribed. Blah 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 blah. We will be back next week. I'm not gonna get the Pendragon video done for this week. And in the meantime, while I've been dragging my feet playing Mr. President, a channel called RPG Imaginings is starting a playthrough series of the Pendragon solo adventure from the Pendragon starter set. So I may still get to it, but it ain't happening this week because I'm still editing Mr. Friggin' President here. Anyway, but you will see at least episode 5 this week. And if I'm really good, you might see episode 6 as well, but probably just episode 5. That series is going very well. I'm getting a lot of good feedback and compliments on it. I'm very happy about that. I'm getting a lot of, oh, you fucked this up, but that's good because I want to catch that stuff, right? I think it's a pretty strong game, and I'll have an opinion. I won't call it a review because I don't do that, but I will have an opinion video at the end of that series, which if we have episode 6 and 7 and then the opinion video is what it's sounding like it's going to break down like right now. But the longer videos are obviously take more time to edit too. The reason I got 2 of them out last week is because one of them was 25 minutes long and the other one was an hour and 26 minutes. This one's going to be closer to an hour and 26 minutes to do the rest of that phase. But it is editing up pretty well. So we'll see that this week. We have the show with Dan on Thursday. I have no idea who our guest is going to be. It's not going to be Ty Bomb, but we're working with Ty on making it work. So we'll have Ty back and we'll have somebody else this week and we'll figure it out. That is at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Thursday evenings. There will be an unboxing video this week. I'm not sure what that's going to be. Brand is going to be badgering me about it until I tell him because it's unboxing day. But I haven't gotten it edited yet because I'm still working on friggin' Mr. President. So there's that. But we got videos coming this week. And don't forget, we got the 7,000 subscribers coming up too. So there'll be a giveaway whenever that happens. So in the meantime, I'd like to thank everybody for coming by. We had excellent numbers tonight that topped out at about 150. So I'm very pleased with that. Hopefully folks picked up some pieces of useful opinion or information or whatever. We will see you all next week. And until next time, happy gaming.